Good morning, afternoon, and evening. From Rome, Italy, I bid you a warm welcome to ICCROM's webinar series on global voices, heritage, and pandemics. My name is Aparna Tannan, and I will be moderating this webinar on behalf of ICCROM. I have the pleasure of being joined today by my colleagues, Helen McCracken from New Zealand and Meghna Goyal from India. Helen will act as a discussant, and she is, at the moment, the principal advisor at the Ministry for Culture and Heritage in New Zealand. She's a cultural heritage professional and a trained cultural first aider. Currently, she's a mentor for ICCROM's multi-partner training on first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis. Meghna Goyal, who is our key speaker today, is a disaster risk management specialist and a humanitarian aid worker. She works at Save the Children in India and is a trained cultural first aider as well. This is the third webinar in the series of ICCROM webinars on global voices, heritage, and pandemics. Recordings of the previous webinars are available at ICCROM lecture series page, which is accessible from the ICCROM website, and these recordings are also available through ICCROM YouTube channel. Conceived within the framework of ICCROM's international program on first aid and resilience for cultural heritage in times of crisis, short name FAR, these webinars offer a platform for our extended community to share experiences and strategies. Together, we would like to reflect on how to support affected communities and strive for resilience of both tangible and intangible cultural heritage while we return to a new normal. ICCROM is grateful to all its partners, and in particular to the Swedish Postcode Foundation for enabling this exchange. For those who do not know what ICCROM is the International Center for the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. It is headquartered in Rome. ICCROM is an intergovernmental organization working in service to its member states, 137 of them, and it promotes conservation of all forms of cultural heritage in every region of the world. Before we proceed further, I would like to apprise you of some house rules during this webinar. As in previous webinars, you can send your queries and comments via the Q&A icon that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will take up some questions after the presentations. In case we are unable to answer all the questions due to the shortage of time, we will respond to them via email and share with all attendees in 2 weeks' time after the webinar. At this point, I would now hand over to Helen McCracken to briefly explain our topic today. So over to Helen from New Zealand. And at this point, I'll just close my feed and invite.
Thank you, Aparna. And hello, everyone. I am delighted to be joining you today to introduce the topic of today's seminar, which is Saving Lives and Intangible Cultural Heritage in Crisis. In the past few months, we have all seen the devastating impact that COVID pandemic has had on the lives of many millions of people, affecting economies, education, and health systems, and threatening the well-being of individuals and communities. In addition, the pandemic is intensifying existing inequalities and poverty. Many people will face the prospect of hunger, discrimination, sickness, and death. We are also seeing profound changes to cultural practices and traditions around the world. Whether we are humanitarians or cultural heritage first aiders, or both, we are all acutely aware that response and recovery will not be simple. That the COVID-19 pandemic is a complex crisis that exists in a world full of many other challenges. In previous seminars, we have seen the importance of situational analysis. through examples such as Syria, Japan, Barbados, and the Ukraine. We've examined the need to identify what cultural heritage is at risk, the complex riskscape in which we are responding, and who might be able to help in that response. Last week, we saw how cultural places in America, Honduras, and India have been impacted by the pandemic, how some of these places have been part of the response, supporting communities through this time of crisis, and also what might be needed in the new normal post-lockdown. This week, we turn to what is at the heart of the First Aid and Resilience for Cultural Heritage in Times of Crisis, also known as FAR, program, and that is to train cultural heritage professionals alongside emergency responders and humanitarians to improve coordination in times of crisis and assist communities to participate in recovery in a way that will enhance their resilience. At the same time, the FAR program aims to build capacity for safeguarding intangible heritage by supporting cultural bearers in times of crisis. Meghna, in her role as a National Humanitarian Coordinator for Save the Children in India, coordinates preparedness and capacity building exercises in support of the organisation's humanitarian priorities. In the event of emergencies, she is often deployed as part of Save the Children's surge team to places where humanitarian aid is urgently needed. Much of Meghna's work involves travelling to remote villages. Here she might work with tribal communities with distinct localised traditions and languages. These communities are usually the most marginalised and the most affected by crisis. It is experiences such as these that have encouraged her to explore the connection between humanitarian relief and the importance of intangible heritage. This webinar will pull from her experiences as a humanitarian aid worker and cultural first aider and examine how we can reach, understand, connect, and work better with communities and cultures in crisis. It was with great pleasure I now welcome Meghna.
Hello everyone. Hi, I hope all of you can see me and hear me. Thank you Aparna and thank you Helen for introducing me, and also a big thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences with all of you about my experiences as the humanitarian aid worker and also a cultural first aider. I have been working in the humanitarian sector for almost 6 years now, and I've responded to over 10 emergencies. In fact, right now we're in the midst of one of the biggest ones, the COVID-19, and several smaller ones in this part of the world in India are also raging through. So as part of this webinar, I'm going to take you all through my experiences and my learnings through remote parts of the country and share with all of you. I really hope that in this webinar, you'll be able to reflect on your own experiences, on your own learnings, on your own interactions with different communities, while I'm sharing my examples, and also connect to whatever I'm saying. So welcome for that. Just quickly starting ahead. Just a second. Okay, just give me a second. The screen is, yes. Okay, so I think the first step as a humanitarian first aider and also as a cultural first aider is to understand the context that we are working in. Very often in the communities and in the context that we work in are very, very challenging. And the first step that we take is understanding these communities. In my experience, the best way to understand a community is to understand it through their own words, in their own stories, in their own languages. And the best thing that you can do is visit it. However, that's not always possible. So even remote assessments or remote talking to the communities through phone calls will be really useful. I'm going to take you through my journey. Let me take you through 2013, back when I had just started the response as a humanitarian worker. This is in the lower Himalayan regions of my country, in a state called Uttarakhand. This was devastated by a massive cloudburst in which more than 6,000 people had died. This was one of the first emergencies I saw up and close, and it was my first experience in interacting with communities who had just gone through a massive crisis. On your screens, you'll see the image of some young boys and girls and even children who are waiting in an open space. Now, participation is absolutely key in when we're talking to the communities themselves. Often there is a tendency for us to assume the crisis, how the crisis has impacted these communities. But the experience that I have seen has shown that these communities tend to share these minute details which we miss out otherwise. Another thing to notice here is that these people are sitting in an open temple courtyard. When me and my team visited these people, they were able to clearly articulate their needs, especially women, children, which is very, very important. Now, let me take you in the same region to a different area. On your screen, you will see that this is a picture of a temple. It's a small local temple in a village, and there are a couple of men standing in front of it. These men are typically the priests or people associated with these temples. They take care of it. They may also be people in very high positions. Often these people will be in positions of power and in a position to greatly impact other people's lives. Now, when we went for an assessment in this area to understand the community, we found that there was nobody else over there and just these men. Why was that? This was because the temple compound or temple premises was really difficult to access, was really difficult to reach for women and for other societies, other sections of the society who are not welcome in these areas. Therefore, whenever you choose to understand, whenever you choose to go to a community, please note that the spaces that you will access them in will be very, very critical and equally important. The next thing that I want to tell you is that always triangulate your data. The people that you see in front on your screen, they gave us a huge list of people who were affected in Uttarakhand in the floods. And they clearly told us that their area was the most affected. And while it is the most easiest thing to do because you're in an emergency situation and you want to get data really quickly so that you can get moving, a small trip in the village will tell you what the reality is. In fact, these were the people of the upper caste and the rich portions of the society hardly affected by the disaster, because the lower caste or the less privileged people in the society closely live near the villages, and they were the most impacted. Had we not taken a walk around that area, we would have probably not known. So always triangulate your data. While the community is the most reliable, there are several differences within the community which you may want to consider before taking your observations. Now I'm going to take you to the eastern part of India, to a state called Assam. Assam is again in the Himalayan region, but is severely flood prone. What you'll see on your screen is, a hand holding fish. Now, this community that we had visited in Assam is traditionally very, very rich in their culture. They have been flood prone for the longest time, so therefore they have evolved mechanisms through which they make bamboo still shelters for their homes. Now, it's easy to get swept away by this culture, and there is a tendency for us to restore this knowledge back to them or restore their houses, because all you can see is devastation on the infrastructure. But again, a closer look, a distinct interaction with the people of different types, you'll come to know that there are more severe needs that are there in the community. In the same village, when we took a walk around, we saw small children huddled up in rivulets. And when we went near them, we saw that they were doing fishing for these small fish. And that was for food, because we realized afterwards that the most important need in that community was food, nutritious food. And which is why then it is really, really important to focus on essentials, see whether people, whether the communities have a shelter, whether they have food to eat, do they have safe drinking water, are they fearing any violence, are the women protected, are there any pregnant women, are there any elderly, disabled. The most important survival and sustenance needs need to be met for the cultural bearer as well as their families to be able to think about cultural heritage. So this is an important point in understanding communities. I really hope at this point, you're able to reflect on some of your own experiences and connect these examples to them. I'm very quickly going to take you to a similar region in the same state, but it is in the upper reaches, so more close to the mountains. This is also chronically affected by floods. And this is probably one of the biggest experiences of my life, and one of the biggest learnings is that we often understand that time saves money, but time is so critical in lives. In the first picture on the top, you will see that some people are carrying a woman on a stretcher. Now, while me and my team were out to this area for doing some relief work, we came across a woman who was pregnant and later found out that her water had broken and she was in labor. At this point, of course, none of us had medical experiences. We were only first aiders, so we quickly employed that skill and made a stretcher for her. Now, the nearest medical station from this area was 15 kilometers away, and the nearest road where a motor vehicle could come was 2 kilometers, and the woman was already in labor. Anyway, we attempted to take her to the nearest health clinic. While carrying her within a kilometer, the woman experienced severe pain and she had to do her delivery right in the middle of flood waters. In the picture below, though it is very difficult to identify, but you will see the second lady from the left has a bundle near her chest, and that is the newborn baby. The baby was delivered right there and then taken to the hospital. Now, normally, while this is, of course, life saved because we were there at that time, we were able to provide some relief with support of our own vehicle. This is a traditional knowledge that is available amongst a lot of communities. Most of the elderly women have this knowledge of delivering or doing childbirth in their communities, but due to new institutional ways, hospitalized methods, this culture is slowly fading away. Therefore, while it is important to focus on this culture, it is also important to realize how necessary it is to respond first in emergencies and really, really fast, because it can really mean the difference between life and death. Now, taking you towards the deep south in my country, to the coastal area of Kerala. In 2018, more than 5 million people were impacted by heavy floods. This was probably the worst flooding this region had seen in over 100 years. It was terrifying, not just for the people, but also for the administration. Many a times, all of us will be working as part of our jobs, in a system, in an organization. And the administration and the system also gets really, really overwhelmed with any disaster as anybody else, as individuals. Now, all of these situations can be personally and administratively overwhelming. In this case, what we have realized that as humanitarian aid workers or as cultural first aiders, whenever you go into the field, the best way to understand the community is through short tools. They are available as rapid needs assessment tools. They are easily available online. You can also do a simple look around in the area that you're going in and ask a few questions, do few interviews and write your observations. You can also do reviews of online information, newspapers, articles, which will give you a lot of information about what is happening in these communities. Now, just to say that because the time is really short, we often do not rely on very in-depth tools. While that is something that we do after some time when the disaster has stabilized and immediate needs are met, it is really important to still do it, but do it by saving times. Using short tools are sufficient. In the picture that you will see, this is a group of musicians, chenda players, they traditionally played drums. Now in the floods, their drums were completely destroyed by flood waters. And this, our short survey helped us find these people, and we were able to provide them these drums, and they could restart their livelihoods again. Quickly, you will see on the screen now a person from the eastern part of the country, from a Yimchunga tribe. These tribes are very common in the eastern part of our country, as much as like in the other parts of the country. Of course, the ways of living have greatly urbanized and modernized, but many of these tribal communities have recently started adopting this lifestyle. Of course, the government of India also provides them these opportunities to showcase their tribal culture as part of these festivals. I'm sure if many of you will reflect, you may know communities, artists, traditional cultural practitioners who often are part of these festivals. These festivals are the biggest source of livelihoods for many of the people. In fact, they may be relying on it for the entire year for their entire income. Many of their families will be dependent upon these festivals. In times like COVID, these festivals have been postponed. And what does this have? This has a huge implication on people and their livelihoods. Now, if you and I are going to go into the field and do an assessment with this tribe, say right now at March end, whereas this person particularly performs in this particular festival in December, you are unlikely to gather this information upfront. But therefore, it is very important that when we are trying to understand the community, we understand them in an entire timeline. We are able to understand what happens to them in different seasons. Do they have different migration patterns? For instance, some of them may actually be going to harvest crop in after monsoons, or some of them may be going for construction labor or somewhere else. They may be employed in different jobs depending on the context that you're in. They may have different religious calendars, which may not correspond to the Roman calendar that we are used to. Another thing is very important to understand is that many of them will be already placed in different risk contexts. So while we may be focusing on an event that has just happened, they may also be experiencing something else already. For example, they may be facing a drought while you visited them during COVID, or they may be struck by lightning every now and then. They may have food shortage. They may have malnutrition. There are several things that are impacting these communities, and it is very important for us to take those into account. Now, I'm just going to go through this forward, that within these communities, are they homogeneous? Or do there exist different kinds of sections within these communities? I hope you are able to, some of you may be working with traditional communities as part of your job profiles, through the museums that you may be working in, or through organizations. It is really, this particular aspect of understanding a community is very important, that all the communities are impacted very differently. The way you and I may be impacted by COVID or any other emergency will be significantly different from a traditional artisan, say living in a remote corner, or dependent on it for their livelihood, or maybe cut off from market access. Therefore, I'm going to just bring to your notice how disproportionately this impact happens. Often, now that we are amidst the restrictions and lockdowns, many of us must have seen advertisements for online classes, such as dance classes, music classes, different kinds of art forms, access to museums online. Many of you may be part of it. This webinar series, for instance, this is part of it online. Many people do not have access to this. In fact, maximum people are not internet users, or if they are, they may have a different language that they speak. They may not be well versed with this. They may not have internet connection. They may not have the right kind of equipment to deal with it. Therefore, it is really important that while we are making initiatives, or while we're taking initiatives to reach out to people, from amongst our communities, what can we do to make it a step further to reach out to those who may not be in the purview of the tools that we have employed. One of my friends runs a cultural space nearby, and we were having a chat, and she was telling me that more often than not, it is easiest to reach out to people who are in your friend circle or in your circle of profession, or who are nearby, who have access to internet, access to calls. But often things that do not fall in the purview of traditional mainstream culture may get left behind. For example, some communities which use mud to make their houses. It is not a high culture, but definitely a very important sustainable practice that needs to be captured, needs to be propagated, needs to be conserved. Likewise, there could be bamboo basket weaving. It could be very small things that do not make maybe a classical, that does not fall in the classical section, but is definitely important. Therefore, identifying these communities, identifying these culture bearers is very, very important. It could mean that we are saving or we are providing the right kind of support at the right time for these particular practices. Now, what happens if we do not reach out to these people? Many times these communities are in dire situations. They may be in a position to not feed their families. They may be in a position that they cannot continue their education. It can so happen that in the lack of support to them, they may abandon their practice. They may look for other alternatives. They may look for negative coping mechanisms. That could be substance abuse, that could be alcohol. It could even go as to selling your own children. It could mean indulging in trafficking. It could mean committing suicide. And that does happen in different parts of the world where marginal families are completely dependent upon the particular practice that may be in picture for their entire livelihood. The other thing is that a lot of people also practice unsafe migration, which means that some people may leave their livelihoods in their villages or their traditional crafts in their villages and move to urban cities for indulging in factories or manufacturing work or in construction work, which may be potentially dangerous for them and even their families. Another negative coping mechanism is using cheaper alternatives instead of what they were used to. For instance, the crop that they might be using might be damaged. And so therefore the raw material for the particular craft that they might be using will not be available. They may use synthetic options, they may use non-eco-friendly material, and whichever is cheaper and easily available. Now, if there is anything in the entire presentation, because I know webinars can be distracting, they can be long, and you may be doing some other work while you're watching this or listening to me, but I would really urge you to focus on this section because this is where the crux of the webinar lies. The actionable points that you can do to bridge this gap between cultural heritage and humanitarian sector and really support communities in crisis. First thing, you can easily reach out to humanitarian agencies in your region through Relief Bill. This is a portal that is easily accessible. It normally has information about all humanitarian agencies in your region who will be responding to the crisis that you are in at the moment. Sometimes it will also have updates which are regular, maybe daily or weekly, and therefore you will know what the humanitarian agencies are doing at that point when you check this information. Another thing that can really support communities is providing cost samples. Now, the humanitarian sector in general, from my own experience, has been that it tends to focus on the immediate needs. While it does take into account the culture of a place, it may not be very well versed with it as much as a cultural heritage professional may be. And therefore, if you are from the cultural heritage background and have access to these communities, you can easily reach out to them and identify their needs for that particular craft. What are the kind of tools do they need? What is the kind of material? How much does it cost? Is it available? Can you replace it with a better alternative? And using that information, you can prepare a cost sample that can be easily shared with the humanitarian community. Often humanitarian communities have a livelihood package through which they reach out to these people. Providing them these cost samples means that it will be easier for them to incorporate it in their planning, and maybe for yours as well. This is an example of a weaving community in India, which was supported by Keto. It is so simple. All they have done is use the online platform and an NGO to connect these weavers to the rest of us. And they have provided the amount of money that will be required to sustain them for a month. I am sure there are innumerable examples that you are also aware of. Maybe you're already doing that, so that's really great. The next thing is providing market linkages. Now, particularly in COVID, I know in India, and I'm sure in many parts of the world, there have been severe restrictions in movement, and there have been shutdowns. In India, it's called lockdown, which means that markets have not been accessible for more than 2 months. This has cut off the supply chain for many of these weavers, artisans, who are relying on small markets or big companies to provide their products to them. One thing that you can do is connect with organizations providing online platforms, providing market linkages, providing cash to people, buying from them, or just connecting them to any other program that can support them. The fourth thing that I'm going to focus is on the government aspect of it. Some of you may be working with government agencies or may be connected to them, if not directly. There are several notifications available in those countries which have a specific ministry for culture, or maybe through allied ministries, who provide schemes for these artisans. Now in India, we have the Ministry of Culture, but we also have the Ministry of Textile. The Ministry of Textile also provides these packages for the weaving communities. We have more than 7 million weavers in India, and these schemes, and they're greatly dependent on these schemes. So one way is to directly access these schemes on behalf of them and connect them. The other is to make a compendium of these schemes in the language that these people are, the community that you are with is used to, see all the qualifications, see the kind of entitlements they are supposed to get, and link them to it, connect them, provide them the forms, provide them the access to that particular government office. These can go a great mile in supporting these communities. Another excellent way that you can do is amplifying their voices. More often than not, many people have no idea about so many of these smaller communities and the crafts and the traditions that they are employing. There are the thing that you are seeing on your screen is a simple example of the fashion community in India. They have formed a small coalition and a fund through which they're able to reach out to weavers. And this has greatly impacted the lives of many, many communities by amplifying their voices. Another great place to advocate on their behalf is within the humanitarian circle. Again, like I said, they have access to these communities and may have resources to reach out to them. So this would be a good position. Next is advocacy within the right groups. I'm just going to take some time to explain to you what is on your screen. This you will see is the United Nations coordination mechanism. It's called the cluster coordination. And each of the important aspects of the aid work is, you can see these are 9 of them. All of them have distinct meetings, distinct chairs. For example, my organization, Save the Children, leads the education cluster, and which is where all the important needs and challenges of the community related to education are discussed. These clusters are activated after all emergencies in your countries. UN is normally the chair of them, or the allied organizations, as you can see. This information is also available on Relief Web. While it is not always possible to attend these meetings, it may be easier for you to identify the right person and share information about the kind of impact it has had on the cultural sector. And this is where you can really advocate for the communities that you're working with. Now, this approach that you will see on your screen is crisis modifier. This is something many of us can do, and I think if you would say that there is something that you can take from this webinar, it will be this approach. It is called the crisis modifier approach. Many of you may be running your own projects. Many of you may be running your own programs and may have some access to budgets. These budgets, this is a common practice among humanitarians, they assign 10% to 20% of their budget for a crisis, anticipated crisis, which is then activated during the crisis. So for example, if you have $100,000 worth project, you may actually keep aside $10,000 US in anticipation of a crisis. And as and when the crisis happens, you use this amount to reach out to the immediate needs of the people you're working with. And this is not limited to humanitarian sector or intangible when you're working with communities. I'm sure you can use this approach even if you are working in a museum or an archive. And this is a commonly applicable thing. An example of this is my mentor, Helen, in her country, in New Zealand. They were able to repurpose a grant that was there in the ministry to suit COVID in particular. This is a great example of how for the grant that you have can be modified for the crisis. Now, I think if I have to share some really important points that I've learned from my experience, the reflections that I've had, these are some of them. The first thing is do no harm. This is a common principle that we humanitarians use, but it is as applicable everywhere else. It is a big principle of cultural first aid. Oftentimes, our intent is to really support communities and we go with the best intentions. But it's not always, we may not always bring the right kind of impact on them. For instance, in COVID, some of us may go with the best intention of reaching a community, but in the remote corners, we may actually end up taking an infection. So therefore, any action that you do should not have any negative harm on the community or the people that you're working with. The second thing that is really important, and I think it's not that well understood, but it is really important to keep in mind, is that the kind of aid that we are providing to anyone is their right, it's their entitlement, it is not charity. In charity, we are generally in a position of power where we are helping communities who are beneath us, but that's not the case. We are actually giving people a right to their dignity. And therefore, it is really important that we approach it from that lens. The third thing, and I am sure many of you probably have experienced this in COVID or any other emergency that you've been part of, that chaos is a standard. It will always happen. We tend to work in it all times. At least I can tell you from my experience that the first week or the first month is always chaotic. But to say that that is what an emergency is, it is supposed to be anticipated. It is, in fact, we're supposed to embrace that chaos to be able to work in that. But just keep positive, keep working. It will always pass through. It always does. The next thing is be really proactive. Oftentimes people hesitate to move because they do not have all the necessary information in a disaster. The disaster is always evolving. The situation is always evolving. Today the needs are X, tomorrow they will be Z, and day after they will be B, C, D. But it is really important for us to act. We have to be the first on ground. As I said, time is not just money. It will save lives. And in some cases, it will save the communities that you're working in. And be the last to leave. It's always easy to leave the communities right after the disaster. In fact, in some cases, you may not have the funding, but there are many non-budgeted activities that you can do with the communities, provide the emotional support, and be the last to leave. Next is to trust people. Disasters bring out the best and worst in all of us. But what I have seen in my experience is that people are always trying to help others in need. And therefore, it is so important for us to trust their instinct, trust their experience, and trust them to be able to do our best in an emergency. Again, many of us are parts of organizations, and we may be relying on their decisions, we may rely on their leadership, we may rely on some important decisions that may not be coming through. It takes time to for such a big organization or even a smaller one to take tough decisions in an emergency. But in the meanwhile, I have seen that each one of us can do something right away, whether it is reaching out to communities around us or it is doing a part of something that is in your project. But there is definitely something each one of us can do. This can be very burdening, and this is a big responsibility, but we can always reach out for help, take support. It's a common practice again. This is called recovery and rest within the community. After every 6 weeks of deployment or 4 weeks of deployment, we usually have 1 to 2 weeks of rest, which is mandatory. So if you're a manager, please ensure that your team is getting the rest that they need. And if you're not one, please reach out to your management and seek support. Another thing that is there is that emergencies will often be very confusing and it will be difficult to take decisions, as you know, and I'm sure that that has been the case for many of us. But there is no definition of what is the right thing in a disaster. We will always have to depend on hindsight to know whether we have done the right thing or not. Sometimes things that seem very, very pertinent at that time may not pan out well in the long term, or vice versa. Things that seem absolutely appropriate for the particular moment that you're in may just not suit the long term. So please know that hindsight will be your teacher. And last but not the least, and something that I would really urge you to put in your minds and put in your heart is called the no regret approach. Please do not regret any decision that you take now. It is impossible for us to know what is happening in the next few days or in the next few months. Therefore, we have to take a no regret approach about taking decisions on projects, taking decisions of where we want to work, what kind of budget requirements, who should we reach out to. It has to be right now at the moment with all the information that you have, and you may make the wrong decisions, and that's absolutely fine. Please instill this confidence in yourself, in your teams, that you should be absolutely not regretful in the work that you do. So this is my few bits, my learning from my experiences in the past 6 years. And now I'm going to give it over to Helen to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meghna. That was a fantastic presentation, and there is just so much in there. That you've given from your own experiences as a humanitarian and a cultural first aider. And some of those key things is that we need to remember who we are talking with and the context in which we are in, because it really matters. And that when we're assessing impact, we need to triangulate our data to ensure we have a good understanding of all those we are helping, including, and most importantly, those who are the most vulnerable. And we need to use the existing short tools for assessment to save time. And as a cultural heritage practitioner myself, that we should be understanding some of these really valuable tools used by humanitarians, because they are so helpful and so useful and are tried and true. And we should think about how we might adapt them for our own situation. And we've got to consider, when we're working in communities, all those other things that are going on, not just, for example, what's happening with COVID, but these communities are existing in places and spaces where there are other hazards, there may be conflict, we may be impacted by the different types of seasons in the year or the religious calendars, and these can all have a bearing on response and a long-term recovery. And of course, we always need to pay more attention, special attention to those who are most vulnerable, because there will always be a disproportionate impact on the marginalised, the invisible, the harder to reach, and the underrepresented. And then when we're assessing needs, we should seek to understand all the needs of the community. That cultural bearers affected by crisis receive assistance that is appropriate and relevant to their needs at the right time. And we must understand these needs beyond just the short term, and not just in the moment. And that we need to work closely with communities to help those who need assistance to be heard, and to find the appropriate information so that communities can access support. These are some of the things that I have picked up, and you in your places out there across the world will have many other takeaways from Megna's talk, I have no doubt. And I'm sure that the guiding lights that she shared with us resonate with us all. But I know, talking with Megna in the last few days, and she has been working on another major crisis in India, and has been using some of these principles. And I just wonder, before we go to the Q&A, I would like Megna to just speak about some of the needs assessment work that she has been doing. So I will share the screen again with Megna.
Thanks, Helen. And yeah, so recently on 20th of May, we have been hit by a massive cyclone or hurricane or typhoon in different parts. This has happened in the east coast of our country, in a region called West Bengal. The impact has been humongous, and as per one of the assessments, is almost 60 million. Now, the impact that has happened is on a very fragile ecosystem. It's called Sundarbans. In the Bangladesh part of it, it is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So as soon as we heard about this disaster that was approaching, we reached out to Aparna at ICCROM, and we thought that we should definitely do something about this. So we all together formed a voluntary collective of some of the previous PAC members, members from different organizations in India, ICCROM, some of them who may be online right now. And we thought that we have to do something about it. The first thing that I shared with you is about understanding the community, and that's precisely what we did. Many humanitarian agencies are looking out to understand the kind of impact that has happened on different communities, and these communities have distinct cultures. So what we did was we quickly came on a WhatsApp group. It's simple, it's actionable. As and when we had access to communication or internet, we were able to send information. We opened an online doc, collected information from the ground, added it to them, started contacting different stakeholders who may be associated with that particular region. So the forest officers, the response forces, the state government, different bodies related to cultural heritage, people who are working with the communities, the local NGO started reaching out to them. And we collected this information, prepared a short report on it with clear recommendations on action. And we were able to share this report with many, many agencies. And the good news is that it was really, really appreciated in the humanitarian circle, many of whom have actually taken it up and already started preparing proposals around it, keeping and factoring the cultural aspect of these communities. And therefore, I would urge you that if you are a cultural heritage professional and have access to information about such communities, please do not hesitate to put them together in a short report and share it with us or with the humanitarian community that you may be part of. I'm sure we are going to be able to share it with others or through their email IDs, or you can reach out to us and we can share it with you then. Helen, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Meghna. So I suppose one important takeaway for me in all of that is whether we're humanitarians, emergency workers or cultural first aiders, there is much to learn from each other. And Meghna, it's always a delight, and I always learn so much from your experiences and what you share. And so with that, I'd like to hand back to Apana for some questions and answers. Some questions, yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Meghna. You both have effectively highlighted that in complex crises such as this one, no one agency can provide efficient response on its own, and we need to coordinate in order to save time, money, and effort. That is why we need to understand how protection of tangible and intangible heritage intersects with humanitarian aid and development aid. So thank you, Meghna, for explaining that to us today. Through its first aid and resilience program, which has been mentioned several times, ICCROM, in collaboration with UNESCO, plans to develop further capacity building initiatives to safeguard intangible heritage within the framework of the 2003 Convention on Safeguarding Intangible Heritage, and build disaster resilience through interagency cooperation. So with those words, I would like to now invite questions from our attendees, and the Q&A box has quickly filled up, more than comments and all, and very interesting questions. So as I said before, we're going to pick up the first ones that I was able to pick up. And then if we have time, we may go live and ask directly some questions. So the first one is actually for Meghna, and that is traditional knowledge. This was a big comment from Dinu Bambaru. We know him well. He's a all-time ICCROM collaborator, himself a very experienced disaster risk management professional in the field of cultural heritage. So he is asking, is traditional knowledge the backup or the first line or a valuable option more readily available in crisis? This is in relation to the remark that you made about the the delivery of the the emergency delivery that had to be carried out to save lives. And
yeah, absolutely. I think in my experience, it has always been the communities who are responding first. They do have traditional knowledge, especially those who have been chronically affected by that particular emergencies. That has usually been floods or cyclones, droughts. Communities have indigenous methods to deal with it. What I have seen in my experience is that because of new modern methods or not very well researched implementation of these modern methods, a lot of the traditional knowledge is forgotten or maybe half known. But wherever it is very well practiced, it is definitely a very, very added and strong value of resilience to that community. As I told you, even in the community that we met with the lady who had to do the delivery right in the middle of flood waters. It is a common practice for them to know about childbirth, but the last 15 years is when institutional delivery became incentivized, and which is why traditional knowledge of childbirth is not now commonly passed on. But if it had, we would probably, and I'm really sad to inform you that that lady died, but had this knowledge been there, probably both lives could have been saved. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is for Helen. As a professional working in the Ministry of Culture, how do you promote interagency coordination and collaboration with humanitarian aid sector? And how do you break the barriers as such?
Well, to be honest, in my job in the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, we have not had that much, well, I have not had that much connection with humanitarian workers. I have had more connection with our civil defence emergency management space. And in that, I would say one of the clear things that, first of all, as a cultural heritage person, you have to understand what you have to offer before you can go and engage with your emergency management people, and then look for opportunities to share knowledge and work alongside and teach about cultural heritage, but also be open to understanding how the emergency management people work and the humanitarian people work, because you have to understand, you have to make the effort to understand what's important to the other people before you, and how you can share those common goals together. I don't think it's any good walking up to anyone and saying, I want to participate, without making that effort to understand what's important to them.
Okay, thank you, Sir Helen, for explaining that. And now is the surprise moment here. I'm going to open the live feed. I'm going to ask Yasmin, our co-host today, to open the live feed from Andrew DeJesse, because he has asked 2 questions. And so I hope we can have the question directly from the person who has posed this question. So Yasmin, could you open the live feed, please? Yeah, or would you like me to? No, you can't?
Talking is permitted.
Okay, so may I invite Mr. DeJesse to speak and you know, tell directly to the panel what his question is, explain his question? Okay, well. So I guess our experiment didn't work. We wanted to make this more interactive. Well, the question was what issues you face that exist when you introduce non-traditional resources for supported communities, specifically relating to sustainability challenges. Is that clear, Meghna and Helen, both? It's that both of you could answer that. What issues exist when introducing non-traditional resources for supported communities?
You know, one of the challenges that I can think of right on the top of my head is, oh yes, I think we can hear Andrew now.
Hello, yes.
Yes, Andrew. So please go ahead and ask your question.
No, it's just the thought is that we want to go in and help. Correct, and so time is of the essence, but having a plan prepared of knowing what traditional practices and what traditional resources they have, and that the idea that we're not going to be there all the time, and that when we leave that they have sustainability. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, if I give you an actionable solution to something like this that we normally practice, is that when we provide, say, tools or a training or some cash support to these people, what we also do is we either organize the community into a self-help group or into any kind of community group that can sustain itself. What another thing that we do is connect them to existing government schemes or maybe existing long-term programs that might be in place for like maybe 6 years, 7 years. Schemes usually in India, I have seen that that is one of the best ways to ensure that sustainability is maintained within the community. But I'm not sure if it will work in all contexts, because in India we do have a strong government in that matter. But yeah, that's a really good way of ensuring it.
Okay, so one more question very quickly. What more can you explain a little bit about short tools? What are short tools? And you mentioned some short tools. So
yes, so so we reach out to any community in, say, 3 or 4 different phases. Like I said, that there is an entire timeline that you may be responding or working with the community. In the first 72 hours or so, especially if an area is accessible, that's when you get the best information. Now, this information can be gathered through, of course, just seeing. That's, if you don't have access, you can just go to the community. That is the best way. Of course, do not do any harm to yourself or others, but if it is accessible, yes, one. Second, you can ask simple questions. There is a tool that we use, it's called 5 simple questions. They are literally just that. Who has been affected? How have they been affected? You know, the simple 6 W's and H, that's another tool. The third tool is something called a rapid needs assessment. This tool may, if you're doing a small group discussion or even an interview, this tool should not take you more than 15 minutes to 20 minutes to fill up. This just contains immediate information about the needs of the people. It does not delve into anything detailed because we know that needs will change and the context is too huge to understand. But within 15 days to a month, we go in with a detailed needs assessment. There are rapid tools. There's something called Mira, which is a very popular tool. It's a very detailed tool, but that's something that we go in later. So these are some things that you can do. You can also develop a short tool yourself. It doesn't have to be something that you get off the internet, but it's always good to align your tool with what other agencies are using so that the information that you collect is as relevant to others. So, yeah.
So thank you, Meghna. And just for our attendees, we have some of these tools online in form of ICCROM's handbook on first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis. There are also links to some of the tools that Meghna has mentioned. And if you would still like to learn more, just send us an email. And for all the questions and comments that remain unaddressed in this session, you will be receiving in 2 weeks' time responses, and they'll be shared with all the attendees who were here today with us. And with that, I would like to thank Meghna and Helen. And I would also like to mention the next week's webinar, which which is on.
Yes. So should I just say it because I'm really excited. One of our colleagues from the FACT course is going to be delivering this webinar on psychosocial support during a crisis. It's going to be so exciting and we're really looking forward to it. If you'd like to join it, then you can join it at the same time next week on Friday.
Okay. And so with that, we would like to bring this session to a close. I wish you all very, again, good morning, afternoon and evening, and stay safe, stay home if you're still under lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much.